This is the Observations Podcast, and I hit the post perfectly without even meaning to. This is the Observation Podcast for the 1st of October, 2023. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
And, quite a lot has happened this past week, rather more than I expected to happen. I'm trying to meddle around with volume and stuff here while I'm talking. It's very confusing. Going live has had one effect that we never had to worry about before, and that is the tyranny of time. Whenever we're just doing audio and whatever, and we were kind of at 7 o'clock on Friday, and we kind of started on time. We might have been 2 or 3 minutes late, but doing it on video and the tyranny of watching that countdown timer go tick, 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 second by second.
Well, how many times did we screw up in the beginning and then...
that was
you know what? I forgot to push record. We're going to have to start over.
Yeah, that was the other thing. We could just, if you weren't listening live, you had no idea what was going on, right? Because we would just restart the podcast. It gave us so much more freedom. Now, the tyranny of having to be on time. Yeah, and then just sort of the irritating part of sitting there, because we have to hit live about a minute early because of the delay with YouTube. And so basically you're sitting there for the last minute just watching it tick down 59, 58, 57, and you're just sitting there silently watching the countdown go. It's a pressure that I really haven't felt since I actually did live radio, and that's been, 30 years at this point. Well, I guess 96 or 97 is when I stopped doing radio in LA. So it's been a long time since I've had to get used to being just spot on. Anyway, administrivia, useless intro comments that don't mean anything. Let's talk about something real. The debate this week with the Republicans. Trump wasn't there. And interestingly, and kind of surprising and not what you would think would be a friendly audience, Ron DeSantis went on to Bill Maher's Real Time, his HBO show. And I've got a short clip I want to show talking about Trump and Trump not showing up at any of the debates. Trump is just not going to show up at any of the debates. This is what DeSantis said.
Okay, so the debate, it was a shit show, but right. I mean, even you said you would have turned it off if you were watching it. I mean, people screaming over each other. I couldn't hear what anyone was saying. It was terrible. But I heard you won. I heard the polling said you won. What did you win? With Trump, no, honestly, with Trump not in the race, what did you win?
Well, but I think that, he's not showing up. He's missing in action. He owes it to voters to show up and defend his record. And I think he thinks he can take a juice poll and then people don't get to vote. That's not the way the system works. You got to go earn votes. So I'm showing up. I'm showing that. And here's the thing. In the midst of all the show that happened, I was the one guy that people said, you know what, this guy's actually acting like a president when the rest were not. And so, okay, there I am. I told Donald, let's do a debate. I'm debating your governor, Gavin Newsom.
We're going to get to that.
But let's do a debate with me and him. I'll do it.
All right. But this.
All right. So there we go. A shot across the bow at Donald Trump, not the first of which that he has delivered.
Yeah.
Trump not showing up at the debates. I think it was Kurt Schlichter about a month ago who wrote a poll saying, look, for tactical reasons, if I was Trump, I wouldn't go to the debates either. I mean, you look at the polls.
Right.
I'm super far ahead. The only thing that can happen at a debate is for me to lose support. So there is no personal interest. There's no self-interest that says you have to go to the debate.
There's no reason to recognize anybody else as legitimate.
On the other hand, the DeSantis point, and it is compelling, I think, which is that you owe it to the voters to defend your record and to do it publicly outside of. And
I think as this goes on, that's going to be more compelling.
Yeah, because Donald Trump has already said he's just not going to participate in the debates. In fact, what Donald Trump this week said is, why have any more debates? I'm winning. I'm going to win.
Of course.
I have the nomination in the bag at this point. There's no reason for any of these other people to even show up on stage. And of course, him calling his own UN ambassador a bird brain, not a good look.
Especially since you might choose her as a running mate.
Bird brain Nikki Haley? I don't think so. Not at this point. I think he's closed that door unless Nikki Haley has no self-respect whatsoever. Which brings up the whole other question that we talked about last week. Who would actually serve in a second Trump administration? Other than Dick Grinnell. Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe Kristi Noem.
Here's the thing. If we were to go back to 2012 and look at what the polls had said, say in 2012, on the Republican side, no one would have thought that Mike Huckabee would have won Iowa, but he did. Polls, I think people like you and I get confused sometimes by forgetting that the vast majority of people are not even paying attention at this point. People who are not political junkies, they're just not paying attention to what is going on in politics.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. As a matter of fact, I don't think they pay attention until about 3 or 4 months out from the election.
Yeah, or if they are going to vote in the primaries, they may start paying attention, 3 or 4 weeks before their primary starts.
Right.
Nobody is sitting here at this point. It's the 1st of October. We are 4 months still away from the first of the primaries, or 3.5 months.
And those polls are national polls. They don't actually make any sense since we don't vote that way, especially not in a primary. So they're meaningless.
Because it only matters in a state. I mean, Donald Trump, let's say in California, right? I mean, Donald Trump might have, 80% of the voters in California and 20% of voters everywhere else. But that 80%, well, I was about to say that 80% is a lot of people that show up in a poll. But when you look at California's voter registration numbers, maybe not, since Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1 in California. It's not like it. Yeah. It's not like it used to be. It's hard to believe that as recently as the 90s, it was quite possible in California to elect a Republican governor.
Yeah.
Not so possible anymore.
No. And, he may be big in Texas, another big population state. But if he's polling low in Iowa and Kansas and Nebraska, I mean...
Well, I mean, look, again, who cares what he's polling like 4 months before the primary start? That's the thing. This is
4
all.
Months? Holy crap! We're talking like.
Well, no, October, November, December, and then we're halfway through January, so 3.5 months at least.
Well, I mean, February is the big. Right? Isn't it February when the big primary day is?
Super Tuesday?
Super Tuesday, that's it.
Yeah, I think so. But again, that's 4 months away now. It's still October 1st.
I'm still hanging on to September.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting closer, but I just don't know that the polls matter. And I certainly don't think, as you pointed out, that national polls matter. And we still have all of these court things that he's going through. What happens?
That one in New York is ugly and stupid.
Yeah, but what happens if he gets a criminal conviction out of one of these trials, and then he wins the primary, or wins the primary
goes up in the polls,
or wins the primary, and then
what's happened the entire time. Every time he gets dinged, he goes up in the polls.
Yeah, but I mean, as a practical matter, what happens if he gets convicted and then gets?
He'll rule from behind bars. I mean, there's literally nothing stopping that from happening.
That is true. Technically.
I mean, I suppose he could be impeached immediately.
I don't know. We are headed towards...
I mean, we're walking right into a constitutional crisis is what we're doing.
Yeah, 2024 at this point is looking like a complete train wreck. And I I have no idea how to avoid it. And here's the thing, it doesn't matter who wins. Because no matter who wins, the other side will say they're illegitimate.
I mean, the closest we can come in a corollary would be, what, 1828? When Jackson lost in the House? That was at least legitimate. It didn't feel that way to a lot of the voters, but there was legitimacy to the way things played out.
Yes, but that is the constitutionally specified method of electing the president. So
yeah, this is like so far out of bounds.
That works. Or 1876, again, when the House of Representatives elected the president through a crooked deal to end Reconstruction in the South.
Well, and that was part of why that went through, was there was a deal in place.
Yeah, but I don't know that we're looking at the House picking the president this time. I just think it's just a shit show. I mean, let's say that Trump is right. And let's say right now, of course, as I said, all the polls are meaningless. We have no idea what's going to happen. And I think predicting the future 4 months out in politics is a mug's game, as we've learned over the past 20 or 30 years, or we should have learned anyway. I don't know how I am just stunned that our political system is this bad. And it is filled on both sides with so many bad actors. And
yeah, I can't argue.
And, we were told, one of the reasons why we should vote for Joe Biden was because he brings back this sense of norms and standards. But no, that's not happening. Joe Biden is as mean-spirited and as partisan as any wild-eyed leftist you can imagine, and he always has been. I don't know where they got this, that he's, a moderate, which, by the way, with the death this week of California Senator Dianne Feinstein, that was ruled out. Well, Feinstein was always a moderate. Maybe in 1978.
I mean, to give her some credit, she did take a bit more tactful approach to certainly some foreign affairs, but no, she was a dyed-in-the-wool lefty. There was no leftist position that she did not champion.
Yeah. So I just don't know what's, it happened yesterday, and of course there's all this imbroglio about it, where one of the Democratic House members pulled a fire alarm in the Cannon office building.
Bowman. That's
Bowman.
Big freaking deal. I mean, how is that different than what any of the J6 defendants have been charged with? He was stopping an official proceeding.
Well,
through illegal means.
You've heard his excuse, right?
Oh, I accidentally did it.
Yeah,
shit.
I thought it would open the door, because the door is usually open on the weekdays, but it's closed on the weekend.
What a bullshit excuse. He knows he's in trouble.
Pull for fire. By the way, he was a high school principal. I'm pretty sure he knows how a fire alarm works.
He knows exactly what that thing does.
He knows. I'm sure he's been all through the procedures on how fire alarms work. So he thought if he pulled it, it would open the door. And he said he wasn't trying to delay the vote. He was trying to get there so that he could vote, you see. And he also
delay
thought,
the vote. That's what he voted
he
for.
He also thought that it would dispense yummy candy. Don't you understand? It was a mistake. But, I mean, technically that is a felony, right? Pulling a
fire alarm when there is no emergency I don't know if it's a felony, but it's at least a misdemeanor. Doing so to interrupt Congress and its legislative actions.
That's a disrupt official proceedings.
I mean, that's literally what every single J6 defendant was charged with. So I don't see how this is any different.
Because reasons. And
yeah, well, because of the D.
Yeah, but I I don't even know what to say about you and I have spent years sitting here on this podcast talking about elections, and we have spent years sort of doing predictions with varying degrees of accuracy and analysis. I don't even know what to analyze. This group of poison trolls that have managed to take over our political apparatus in this country are so off the hook that I don't even know how to predict what they're going to do. It's become a clown
in
show.
This, yeah, I mean, especially in this sort of predicament where the main clown is the two main clowns. One is completely addled. The party doesn't want him, but they'll push him, as long as they can use him. And the other one is insistent on being the center stage, or the center ring, as it were, and is being absolutely hounded legally by his political opponent. I mean, it's almost unreal. I mean, this is the sort of stuff of novels, of like spy novels and stuff, or dystopian novels. I mean, it's sort of incomprehensible that Trump is being attacked and his hangers on. Anybody who's associated with him has been absolutely annihilated. I mean, that guy in Georgia who just took a plea deal. What was he? He was
just one of the electors.
He wasn't even. He didn't do anything important, and he's just like, please get me out from under this.
Yeah, he just showed up and voted. He just showed up as an elector and voted for Donald Trump as an elector. And okay, I guess that's illegal. I guess he certainly pled.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. He certainly pled guilty, and he's going to turn state's evidence against Donald Trump. But as we talked about last week, what does he have that we don't know? What secret insight is he going to provide the prosecutor that Donald Trump hasn't already publicly stated?
Yeah, I can't imagine that there's anything. And that's the other thing, is that none of this stuff has been hidden. I mean, we've known about it for years.
It was all done publicly.
Trying to make
it was
a
all
federal
done
case about it.
Yeah, it was all done publicly. It was all done openly. It was all. I mean, nobody had any.
There's no skullduggery here.
Yeah, there's no hiding anything that was done. There's no conspiracy to keep the American people from learning what was happening behind. I mean, they just did it publicly and openly. And okay, I just have this horrible thing. Now, look, I don't think Donald Trump can win a general election. I just don't. As unpopular as Joe Biden is, and by the way, the American people have been very clear, if we are to believe poll after poll after poll, that they don't want either of these jackwads as presidential candidates. But
I'm in agreement with the publisher.
But it looks like that is what we're gonna get, because the Democrats can't really just jettison Joe Biden. I mean,
although scuttlebutt on on the Hill is that with Feinstein out of the way and Gavin Newsom promising to nominate a black woman to her seat for as an interim, and he's also said that he won't nominate any of the current candidates for the seat. So that takes Barbara Lee out, which she was pissed about. Who does that leave?
Honestly, I agree with Gavin Newsom's reasoning about that, but go ahead.
I mean, I think Kamala Harris, or Kamala, I don't know how you say her name. It's Harris.
It's Kamala Harris.
Yeah, so it is I mean, she's like the most obvious choice. Now it'd be a step
But
back
she's
for
the
her
sitting vice president.
because she's the sitting vice president.
So he can nominate her, but she's already been elected to federal office. She can just say
And
no.
he would not nominate her unless she was like, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah, he couldn't, because all she would just do is say, I'm vice president of the United States. What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. I've already been a senator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she knows, as well as everybody else, that she is a heartbeat away from the presidency. So what
she's hoping for?
What blandishments do you offer the vice president of the United States to say, hey, step down from being vice president, go back
Hey,
to
maybe
the
the
Senate,
cocaine was hers.
which means Joe Biden has to pick a different vice president who has to be
Who has to be actually cleared by the House?
who has to be cleared. Well, actually, by the Senate, I believe.
I think it's the House.
Is it? It's very confusing how that works, because we only done it once, and that was when Nixon
Right.
resigned. And then Ford had to appoint a vice president after he became president. And so I'm a little iffy on those details. But the fact is, she's like, I'm a heartbeat away from the presidency. You want me to give that up so that someone else can be the vice president? Oh, and by the way, who is that someone else? Is that you, Gavin? Am I
Take it.
Am I supposed to step down for you? No, I don't think that works. I think that's a silly conspiracy theory that, we're going to make
Most likely, but
Kamala
I mean, this
senator
is literally the talk of the town right now.
Yeah, because they would like to get rid of Joe Biden, and nobody wants to go.
They want to find a way to get rid of Joe Biden, but that means they also have to get rid of Kamala Harris.
But Joe Biden has to willingly want to go, because otherwise they're left with the 25th Amendment problem.
Well, or they could let this impeachment process play out and actually, get rid of him. And
you and I both know that if this
to force him out,
you and I both know that this impeachment process is not going to get rid of Joe Biden, because he's not going to get convicted in the Senate. Because again,
unless they want him out.
The fact that we're talking about all of this is just crazy town. This is not the country I grew up in. These are not the political processes that we believed ran our central
political parties,
our central government. These are not, these are just not normal times. This is the decay of American republicanism. I don't know of any other way to say it.
Well, that's exactly
this
right.
Banana Republic shit show that we're engaged in from both the Democratic and the Republican side is, this is, I always hate to make these, and people have been making these comparisons since the 1970s, but this is how the Roman Republic finally just slit its own throat.
Exactly right. It's funny too, because there was a poll done not maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, just a random poll, and it was, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And apparently people think about it quite a bit.
Well, actually,
it was actually very, very prominently thought about.
It actually started on TikTok with a girl just asking her boyfriend, at random, I think, just how often do you think about how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And he's like, I don't know, once a week, once every 2 weeks or so, maybe once a month. And she was like flabbergasted. She was like, I haven't thought about the Roman Empire since I learned about it in high school. How is he thinking about it every day? And that started this whole trend of women asking their boyfriends, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And being shocked when the boyfriend is always like, I don't know, every couple of weeks or so.
Yeah.
They just don't get it. It's a good thing that question is not asked of me, because I think my frequency would probably be fairly high on that. But we are.
But that's what I mean, though. It's there. People do recognize it. Certainly not everybody, and maybe not even the real, similar situations. But certainly the fall of Rome, and I think at least most people know, if they know anything about Rome, that it fell because people just stopped defending it, stopped sticking up for it. And if that's all well, right there, you've got a real corollary to what's going on. And with, political class no longer defending America and American values, American culture. I mean, of course it's going to start to fail, especially when they're pushing so hard against and trying to break American
That
culture.
is where the analogy even more troublingly falls apart. Because at least when the Roman Republic fell and became the Roman Empire under Julius Caesar, and then his adopted son, Octavian, who became Caesar Augustus, at least when that happened, there was still a sense of Romanism, a sense of
absolutely.
A sense of what the traditional Roman virtues
until
were.
400 and what 457 or whatever, when it fell. That's not exactly true, but it came under rule by something other than a Roman senator or senator's family.
Yeah, it came under the rule of whoever could gather enough legions to claim the throne.
And then at that time, Rome was really centered in Constantinople anyway. But
my point is that there were really two separate phases to the fall of Rome. There was the fall of the Republic.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Which is when the political system basically just went haywire and allowed someone like Julius Caesar to take over.
Yeah.
And then there was the diminution of interest in Romanism, qua Romanism and defending Romanism, the whole idea that you would march out as part of a legion as the embodiment of the Mos Maiorum of the people and Senate of Rome. That went away years later. So there were these real two breaks. I think the thing that bothers me more than anything is that we're having both of those breaks now. We're having a political breakdown plus a breakdown of defense of Americanism and American ideals, and the whole idea of American exceptionalism is under extraordinary criticism at this point. So
by the very people we depend on to actually teach.
Right. So we're having both of those cultural breakdowns occur in our society simultaneously. They were separated by 300 years between the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. We're having them all happen at the same time.
Right.
And so what we end up with is just,
it seems as we go forward, like all these things that happened in the past happen on fast forward now.
Yeah, and what we're getting is this banana republic.
These breaks.
We're getting this banana republic government that is not competent. And look, I guess it's good that it's not competent, because if they were competent, think of the damage they could actually do as opposed to the damage that they're doing now through their. I mean, even though we assume that many of these people who are in the political class are willfully malevolent, at least they're dumb enough not to be good at being malevolent. They're malevolent in petty ways. But that's going to change soon. And this whole edifice, look, by the way, if the United States just turns into, 1950s Argentina, then I don't know what hope the rest of the Western world has.
Well, we've got the star. We've already got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
We have our own Eva Perón. Although an Eva Perón of the left. And by the way, I don't know what takes the place of the West. China.
Well, that's the biggest problem. Is there is nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, China likes to.
No other country.
Yeah, China likes to think that they could be the ones that do it, but China is about to undergo a complete demographic collapse and a complete economic collapse. Peter Zion this week came out and was just talking about China's collapse. Is they have about 10 more years before everything falls apart, before they no longer have enough workers to sustain their retirees. They just have an unsustainable demographic collapse. Their demographics look like an upside down pyramid. And on top of that, their economy. And look, this is a dumb article. strict economic policies and political decisions that were deemed unwise. That is not the problem with China. The problem with China is that they have spent the last 25 years forcing investment in real estate.
Yeah, which is why you have all those empty buildings and a collapsing rental market.
Because they have malinvested so much of their money. And by the way, the Chinese people will never get that money back. So that was the one thing that you were allowed to invest in as an individual citizen in China was real estate.
The only thing they could do would be to open up their economy and let others invest in it, buy those buildings, and
look, three-quarters of those buildings are going to have to be destroyed because they're so shoddily built. They were basically built on bribery and graft, and that's the only thing holding any of them together. None of these apartments or houses that these people have put their, literally in some cases, their life savings into, are worth a fraction of what they paid for because the government malinvested all of this money. And they're not even reliable assets because they're so shoddily built that they're liable just to fall over in 4 or 5 years. And all of the money that was supposed to go for building materials basically went to bribes to officials or bribes for party-connected businessmen who got their kickbacks. China isn't going to be able to step up and do any of this. China is on the verge of complete collapse economically and demographically. So,
I did just see something about how they have designated people as professional children to give them a job designation because they live at home still, they have no job prospects, and they're dependent on their parents. So, okay, you're a professional child. That's just, talk about manipulating the numbers.
And by the way, this is what happens when you put the government in charge of investment. Mm-hmm. This is inevitably what happens. The government malinvests everything and corruption is rife. So China,
to the extent they even invest it, if they don't just spend it. They call it investment, but it's not investment. It's basically it's graft.
Look, building houses is an easy way, and apartment buildings and other real estate is an easy way for a government to make economic growth numbers look fantastic because that money is being spent. Although, maybe half to 2/3 of it are being stolen away in graft. But that money is being spent. The buildings are being created. They may all fall down in 3 or 4 years, but for now they've been created. All the roads have been paved. It all looks great, but who lives there? How much of that building, how much of that construction was actually needed? When the government just says, this is the one way that we are going to, build the economy and increase GDP, okay, great, but what is your return on that investment? Usually we don't invest in capital expenditure unless that capital expenditure is going to pay off in some way. This is not. And so China is not going to be the 21st century is not going to be the Chinese century, but I don't know whose century it's going to be because there's no other country.
Well, it's not going to be ours unless something changes drastically. And even then, I don't know. Maybe Poland emerges. I don't know. They're really not big enough.
Well, look, say what you want about Peter Zion, but as far as the American idea is, once we won the Cold War, and once the Soviet Union broke apart, America's interest in being the world's policeman, in having a 600-ship navy that could, kill piracy on the seas, open the sea lanes for free and global trade, we just lost interest in that. And we lost interest in free and global trade. We are going to go back to a 19th century trading system of regional trading partners at best.
At best, yeah.
Because the United States has lost all interest in any sort of global interconnectivity. And why shouldn't you? Because when China is a key part of that, And China is not a democratic nation, and China has its own ambitions, which seem to be more ambitious than their ability to achieve. But nevertheless, they have the ability to do largely what they did during COVID, which is just to sabotage that entire global system. So it doesn't make globalization
To
look
say
good.
that our elites aren't interested in that global system, though, I think is stretched. They love that global system, but they're not willing to do the things that actually support it. As you've mentioned, we control the seas for now. I mean, we were basically the British Navy of the 1800s, 1700s.
Yeah, well, barely, but sure.
I mean, we're the ones that keep the lanes open. We're the ones that have the projection power. And it's lessened over the past 20 years, but we're still the ones that can do that. And really, it's only us. And if we pull back, well, you see piracy go up. We got pirates in Oakland, California, for God's sake now. I mean, if we don't have the will and we don't have the capability, then yeah, that all, you're right. We would have to go to regional, because otherwise it's just not safe enough to do transatlantic or trans-Pacific. I mean, other than air travel. But shipping is way more efficient when you're talking about heavy goods.
Yes,
so
but
yeah, if we
without
can't
a
do
global guarantor of trade, then you don't have
that,
that.
you don't have global trade, right?
It simply becomes too risky and too unaffordable. And
It becomes too unaffordable is really the big thing, because nobody will insure it, and the only risk takers are going to be pirates, or black market dealers, because they'll take the risk because they're going to get a high reward off of this. So crime shoots up.
Look, at least the United States is a net food exporter. So
for now,
we're not going to starve. Well, for now. But, we don't have to starve. We don't import food. We export food. To the extent that we do import food, it's because we want blueberries in February, right? So we grab them from Chile or wherever. But, hey, I grew up at a time where you didn't get blueberries in February.
As did I.
That's a new thing, which brings us on to...
Didn't get corn in February either.
Yeah, canned corn. You always had canned corn.
Yeah, always had canned corn. That's true.
Yeah, but
Monty.
But that brings us on to our own economy, and things aren't doing all of that great. Rite Aid is talking about bankruptcy, closing 400 to 500 of its stores. So, by the way, is Walgreens, based on its third quarter earnings call. They're talking about closing up to 250 stores.
Sentence above there, 900 stores.
Now, this is a little different. This is Rite Aid, or CVS. CVS in 2021 put forth a consolidation policy that would close down about 300 stores a year over the next 3 years. They have been doing that. This is what they said in 2021. They're still pursuing that. By the end of 2024, 900 CVS stores are going to be closed at the end of 2024. So certainly they're under pressure. And then if you want to look elsewhere in retail, the shoplifting problem, where what's happening here, I guess I shouldn't have looked at this article before the podcast, because I'm now locked out. By the way, pro tip, kids, and we're going to hit F12 and open up our developers tools in Chrome, and we're going to go to settings, So this is something you can do, because you know what really irks me is whenever I am told I can't look at a page because I haven't subscribed or whatever. Most of that, not all of it, but most of it is done through JavaScript. So I'm going to go to Settings inside Developer Tools, and I'm going to turn on Disable JavaScript. And I'm going to reload this page. And it still says subscribe to unlock. So hold on. This may not fix the problem. I do get it.
No, this is fascinating.
But sometimes it does. The price of shoplifting is getting dangerously high. Okay, well, the disabled JavaScript did not work. It often does. I know it works really well for the Washington Post. But apparently it is not going to work well for me now. So you know what? We're just going to forget about it and talk about it anyway without a newspaper floating in the background, I guess. And that is Walgreens and Target. Not Walgreens, Target, Walmart, several other stores who are saying they're closing due to shoplifting concerns in some areas. I don't think people in the West and generally appreciate what it's like to live in a high trust society where you can just go into any store, find anything that you want, stick it in a cart, walk up, pay for it at a checkout, and walk out. Everybody just knows how that system works, and everybody believes that for the most part, that is how the system will work, and everyone will voluntarily participate in that system. What we're seeing in many places, certainly in many urban areas, is basically organized shoplifting, where 10, 20, 30 people are just running into stores and just running out with armfuls of stuff. The city of Philadelphia actually sent their cops out to break up one of these things this last week, but in most cases that doesn't happen. And sure, look, retail is under pressure anyway. And so it's easy to blame shoplifting as an excuse for consolidation when you're going to do consolidation anyway. So, how much of this is actually due to shoplifting, I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know. But it's what they're saying on their earnings calls, which is that shoplifting at some locations is just so rampant, they're losing so much money, they can't afford to stay open. And so those stores are going to have to be closed. And for those stores that are staying open, I mean, I'm sure you've seen, as I have, just aisle after aisle of every product now under lock and key. You can't just freely go into stores.
We don't have that so much here, but what we do have is there's only one way in and one way out of grocery stores. Most thrift stores or like CVS's are like that already, but the local chain of supermarkets here is the Giant, and they have closed down all but one exit and entrance. So you can't go out and in but one door. And that's because they've said, what they've said to me is because they've had too much retail theft, which, I mean, I assume that they're being honest, but it's just weird that it's a grocery store. You would think you would notice if somebody just like walking out the door with stuff.
Yeah, well,
apparently it happens all the time.
And here's the thing, the neighborhoods that are going to get those stores closed down first. And even though the retailers themselves the
two Giants that I go to are both in good neighborhoods. One's right next to the university, and the other one is
I dare you to define good neighborhood in a way that won't get us permanently thrown off of YouTube.
Well, I mean, if you look at average home price over here, right next to me, right next to George Mason, it's somewhere up in the 800s. And over at the other Giant that I go to, which is down the street from my youngest child's school, those home prices are even higher. So I mean, these aren't, destitute neighborhoods or anything. They're not in any kind of squalorless areas.
Right. Well,
Um,
let's not dance around the issue. These retailers are going to close stores that are largely in either black or Hispanic neighborhoods.
that's absolutely true.
That's largely what's going to get cut.
And they're going to be inner city, um, small footprints, and they're not going to, yeah, they're going to be the places where they don't have actual police presence, where they have large mob, what do they call them? Where everybody gets on the phone at the same time.
Flash
Those,
mobs.
yeah, those things.
Yeah, so those are the stores that are going to get closed first. And
Yes.
then we're going to go
And
back.
those have been the stores that have gotten closed first.
And we're going to go back very quickly to hearing about food deserts and with all of these
Food
drugstores.
deserts, that's right.
And with all these drugstores closing down, prescription deserts. And look, those are two things that you need to live. So where do black and Hispanic families buy food when their stores are being closed?
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I'm starting to hear in the DC area, you get a lot more of these political ads, and I hear it on the radio all the time about, and it's being sponsored by something called Pharma, which would lead one to assume that it's by the pharmaceutical companies. I don't know if that's true or not. But
Pharma is the trade association for the pharmaceutical industry.
That may very well be true. And so they had this commercial about it's like middlemen between your insurance company and where you ultimately buy your medicine, and they will make a deal with the insurance company and then the pharmacy, which they may or may not own, in order to make more money for themselves. And so I keep hearing this commercial, and I'm like, I've never had any insurance company tell me where I can and cannot buy, my medicine. So I don't know how real that is, but I suspect it's, I suspect that this is a lead up to some impending bill that is being discussed on the Hill, where somebody's going to be made the bad guy, and it won't be the people who are shoplifting and closing stores down. It's going to be the CVS's.
It's going to be the retailers. The retailers are going to be the
exactly.
bad guys who are closing the stores down because they don't like black people. That's what it's going to be.
And that's what this sounds like to me, is a precursor to kind of putting that into law.
And so what you end up with are some cities. I forget who it was. Was it San Francisco or I can't remember, but now they're proposing opening up government grocery stores.
Chicago, yes. Yeah. Whoever the new
the commie mayor of Chicago,
Brandon something.
Yeah,
he proposed. We'll make government grocery stores. It's like, dude, do you have any concept of history at all? Have you actually looked at how this works? No, of course not.
I wonder how government grocery stores would handle shoplifting, or government pharmacies.
Barbed wire up.
Yeah, here's the thing. If I wanted to exert greater control over the populace, making retail dangerous and unprofitable, and then replacing it with government-owned and run outlets, would give me direct control over the supply of food and goods that made it to the average citizen. So if I really wanted to exert control over people, I would set up a situation in which I did not prosecute shoplifting, and in which I did prosecute store owners or employees who physically attempted to prevent shoplifters from leaving with goods, because after all, it's just property. It's not even your property. It's certainly not
insured.
worth it, and it's insured. It's certainly not worth any violence to stop it. Set up a legal regime that makes shoplifting profitable and essentially risk-free. Drive regular retailers out of business, and then replace it with, in these areas where they've been driven out of business, we can replace it with government-run retail outlets. And government to the rescue. If I was a conspiracy theorist, I could certainly come up with some compelling reasoning as to what might be happening in some of these places.
It sounds evil and diabolical. Well, it is evil and diabolical, but it's also historically proven. I mean, we've seen this happen. So to see it start happening in a place like Chicago, which has leaned heavily left for
70 years.
Yeah, at least.
Chicago has not elected a Republican in my lifetime.
Yeah. I mean, they have literally put themselves in the soup. And nobody seems to think that changing how they vote or who they vote for will do anything. And maybe that's true. Chicago machine politics are pretty
why should
famous.
you? If you're well-to-do and you live on the north side of Chicago, none of this ever affects you.
Because you're outside of Chicago. You're in Lake Forest, or you're up along the coast of Lake Michigan. I mean,
your life is just fine. Nothing's going to change for you. It's all those dirty poor people who are going to have their lives changed and ultimately controlled.
But those dirty poor people are also voting for this same shit.
Yeah, that's true. Which again, if you want to go back to Rome, how do you I mean, even though they both got assassinated, how do you think the Gracchi became tribunes of Rome? They sold votes to the Roman plebes. And that's
exactly what's going on. I mean, you basically do votes of dirty poor people with, handouts, with giveaways. Look at what
and here's the great thing about it. Once they become addicted to the handouts and they become addicted to the giveaways and the monthly checks and the food stamps and all of the other things, well, saying you're going to do anything to those programs becomes almost impossible, because you have produced, at this point, since the 1960s, generations of dependents.
What did Ronald Reagan say about the proof of immortality was, and I'm paraphrasing, it was something like, the length of a government program was the proof of immortality. What the Great Society did to black homes in particular was absolutely destroy the interfamily connection, and ravaged the black community to the point where it's far more common. I think it's something like 60-70% of black kids now are born and grow up in single family households.
Look, there's a documentary, I know we talked about it a couple of years ago, on Netflix, and it is it's a documentary about the building and running and ultimately running down of the Pruitt-Igoe housing complex.
Yes.
And one of the stories that is told there, what they would do is they would go in and they were going to tear down the ghetto to provide decent homes for black people who were living in the ghetto. So what they would do is they would tear down these homes. They built Pruitt-Igoe, and then when families would come in and say, we want to move into Pruitt-Igoe, well, our priority are for, fatherless families and things like that. Do you have a father living in the household? Yes. Oh, well, unfortunately, we won't be able to give you. And so these families, I mean, fathers would actually have to move out of state, maybe not far out of state, but across the river, so that their family could claim that they had no father because he was not allowed to live with his family. Only the mother and the children were allowed to get an apartment at the Pruitt-Igoe housing complex. So basically,
Yep.
they were just intentionally destroying intact black families by destroying their houses, which were all substandard, but then saying, but you can't have a new house to replace the old house if your father's still around.
And prior to all this, black families were much more likely, not much more likely, but more likely to have a two-parent home than white prior to the Great Society. It was something like upwards, not quite 90%, but in the high 80s of black families lived in two-parent households. And then Great Society comes along, and all of a sudden that single parenthood starts shooting up and shooting up and shooting up to the point where now even Hispanic and white families are also living in it's not, I don't think it's quite a majority for either, but it's close.
It's close. It is getting
for
closer.
Both of them.
Yeah.
It is getting closer to the point where a majority of families now are not, two parent households. And this is what this is wrought on us. And we had a warning. Patrick Moynihan,
Democrat,
put together a study, a Democrat put together a study, and it was buried by Congress because it was politically inconvenient and incorrect. And it spelled it out. I mean, he said it himself. I mean, he crunched it down to a very good soundbite. If you want more of something, pay for it.
Yeah,
and that's what we've been doing.
You literally do get what you pay for. And if you pay for single parent families, then that's what you're going to get because people respond to incentives. And, Thomas Sowell has made, a lot of talk about the law of unintended consequences. At some point...
He's got a new book out, by the way.
Yeah, at some point, it's no longer unintended. At some point, it's
that's exactly
just
right.
Intended.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, I think that these are intended consequences.
And by the way, the dissolution of the family is not some minor issue, and it's not so, it's okay if you only have, a mommy and no daddy or a daddy and no mommy, although it's usually a mommy and no daddy, because,
or a grandma.
Equal rights notwithstanding, that's not exactly how divorce court works in most states when it comes down to child custody and other matters, child support, etc. But the family is, and I know you get so much pushback whenever you say this, but the family is the building block of any society. The family is...
It absolutely is.
The family is
always been
the nucleus around which everything else is based. And that is not a political statement. That is an evolutionary and biological statement.
Factual statement.
That affinity for family is the basis for all other extended social contracts that we enter into with each other. And if I forget who it was, one of the philosophers that said, every generation is a vertical invasion of barbarians because every generation of children has to be civilized.
I thought that was you.
No. I did not originally come up with that. But every generation has to be civilized, and that is done via the family, teaching kids what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. And if you lose that, then what are you left with? How do you convey that training to children at an early age?
Without them dying or being, or becoming monsters themselves. I mean, you really don't have a choice there. I mean, you've got to assimilate them to what is okay and what's not okay on in a cultural sense.
Because children are barbarians. They're concerned about themselves. They're concerned about
and
what
that's
they
it. That's
want.
all they care about. I want. Yeah, of course you want. That's what you want. I mean, and then you have to learn, oh, maybe I can't have that. Maybe I need to do something, or maybe I need to earn it, or, uh, whatever the case may be. But yeah, that's exactly right. You have to look out for your brothers and sisters and your parents and your grandparents. And that emotional connection is already there. So it's much easier to teach them that
to extend that connection to other people. By the way, and I haven't said much to chat, hi chat, but the quote you're looking for, thank you chat, is government programs once launched never disappear. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life that we'll ever see on this earth. That was
the Reagan quote.
That was the Ronald Reagan quote, yes.
Yeah, the closest thing to eternal life you'll ever see. That's so true.
And by the way, if you don't have a family to teach values at an early age, then what you end up with are relatively uncontrollable adults who require increasing doses of coercion to stay in line. That's not...
Yeah, you end up with feral beings.
Yeah, that is not a... That's not
if you
a
don't grow up with
sustainable
a sense
culture.
Of this is mine, this is not mine. I mean, something as simple as that. And every brother and sister knows between this is mine, that is not mine. It's definitely not yours.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's just watching what Robert Bork once called slouching towards Armageddon. We just keep heading towards a cultural crash. And by the way, this is not helped along, or perhaps intentionally helped along, by a whole raft of government policies. Not just in terms of social programs, but in terms of, well, look, border policy.
I was about to, yeah, exactly.
The CBP this week was down in Texas.
Hey, good job, buddy. Thanks for letting me in.
Cutting open razor wire so that migrants could just... This is the Border Patrol who are opening up border wire and fist bumping immigrants as they come into the United States. You know, this whole...
How is that legal? How is that even legal?
It's not. It's not.
I really don't get why this is just...
It's literally a black letter. It's literally a black letter violation of federal law. Those Border Patrol agents are literally guilty of aiding and abetting illegal immigration.
Yes. And that comes right under the INS. Well, so is the president, frankly, because they're the ones who are ordering this stuff. I mean...
And by the way, who
and
do you
pretend
think,
that there's no crisis.
And who do you think gets hurt first, by the way, by all of these people who are just coming across the border, who are being fist bumped by the CBP as they cross the border? It's going to be native-born, low-income, Black and Hispanic American citizens. They're the ones who are going to see downward pressure on their wages. They're the ones who are going to be competing against immigrants for any low-skilled, low-paying job that comes along. And, of course, because they're Americans, they're going to have higher bills to pay than they can afford to pay on the salaries that are going to be available with
just the
millions
medical
upon
bills
millions of
and the school bills alone. It costs like hundreds, not hundreds necessarily, maybe a couple $100 billion when it comes to schooling and medical care for these non-citizens. And that shows up in our prices for both of those things. We pay higher taxes. We pay higher medical premiums. We pay higher insurance costs.
And by the way, if I was intentionally trying to destroy the country, if I was intentionally trying to increase social
invite an invasion,
discohesion, if I was intentionally trying to fundamentally alter the way the American economy works, and by the way, the social fabric of trust that we all are supposed to share, if I wanted to undermine all of that intentionally, what would I do differently?
Well, which makes you kind of understand this is purposeful. And we've been saying this for years. We know why the Democrats want these people to come in. And it's because they see them as new voters. And the Chamber of Commerce types who are often Republicans want them to come in because they see cheap labor. And they don't ever, well,
it's what Trump, it's what
concern themselves.
It's what the MAGA consequences. It's what the MAGA voters call the uniparty.
Yes, absolutely.
There are so many things.
I can't disagree with that at all.
There are so many things about which Democrats and Republicans agree completely, at least the establishment versions of them. One of them is basically unlimited immigration into the United States.
Absolutely.
They've decided that for whatever reason, there are jobs that Americans won't do. What they really mean is they won't do them at the current wages.
For a certain price.
Current wages. And also, because of demographics, we need a whole bunch of younger workers in from overseas. And so we have not only just opened the floodgates at the border, there is an endless series of visas like the H-1Bs or whatever to bring in people from India or China or other countries. Notice it's very rarely, France or Germany or the UK, right. To bring those workers in to, fill these vital roles that need to be filled because Americans either won't or can't do these jobs. And Republicans who have been traditionally supported by business think, hey, lower wages are great, so we should support it. And of course, Democrats who are interested in largely new voters for at least a soft American version, although how soft I'm no longer sure, of socialism, they'll get reliable voters for that. Ultimately.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, look, there's a reason they pushed this motor voter thing, and which came under Clinton, and the idea that, well, everybody gets driver's license. Oh, and when you get a driver's license, you automatically get signed up on the voter roll. And with these mail-in ballots, well, then you automatically get sent a ballot. And we don't know. They're supposed to patrol themselves as to whether or not they actually vote. Yeah, right. It's absolute bullshit. We know.
We're just making it easy for them to register so that people can exercise their rights, you see. Which is also why
don't have those rights.
Which is also why we dislike any suggestion that people show an ID when they show up to vote.
That's exactly right. That's the only. And look, that's not going to stop everything. That will only stop a smidgen. But there are when you get rid of a ballot signature matching, that's suspect. When you insist that addresses be real and you check on them and there's 50 to 60 people at one address, that's real and it should be shut down. But
just going through
that's really at a state level.
Just telling the Secretary of State to go through and vet the voter rolls is an invitation to political chaos in most state legislatures.
Right. That's completely. That's what Trump's getting basically sued for. It's absolutely ridiculous, and we know the game, but you get called racist or whatever phobic because you don't
Xenophobic.
Yeah, that would be xenophobia. Yeah, that's true. Um, because you don't agree with these things and you want clean elections. But they do everything to dirty the elections up as much as possible. This does not speak to good intentions. Those are not good intentions. Those are mal-intentions.
So it doesn't matter. This is the important thing. It doesn't matter how rigorously and how meticulously you count the votes to ensure that your vote counts match with the appropriate level of exactitude of the votes received. If you don't vet who's voting and how those votes are received, what you end up with is a theater of election integrity. Oh, well, these ballots are under tight security and they are bonded and they're closed up in these
And where does this always
lock
come
boxes.
Up? It always comes up in Philadelphia, in Fulton County, Georgia, in
Chicago.
Chicago. It always comes up in these Democratic strongholds where they do nothing but these things. And there's always shady business. There's like trucks coming in with votes that were just found somewhere. I mean, please, we're not that stupid. I mean, we're pretty stupid. I'll give you that, but we're not that stupid. We can see a scam when it's happening, especially when it's so fucking obvious. And they don't care. They're like shoving it in our faces now. They like, yeah, of course we're cheating. Who gives a fuck? You don't care. Oh. Just drives me up the fucking wall.
Yeah, and this automatic voter registration, inebriated Plutarch says, my governor just decreed that voter registration would be automatic upon license approval. No idea if there are any safeguards. I wouldn't exactly bet on it. Well, neither would I.
I would never bet on it.
The whole motor...
I would bet against it.
I am much more traditional when it comes to the way voting should be held. First of all, I think it should be pen and paper.
I agree.
So take the machines out of it, pen and paper. There should be signature verification. There should be ID verification. I'm not very keen on absentee voting at all, unless you can provide a reason in advance for why you need it.
Which is how it used to be.
And by the way, I'm not a big fan of this early voting deal where you can just show up a month
early voting
and vote like that. I mean, it's if 2 weeks prior, if you voted a month prior to the election and 2 weeks prior, your candidate was found as I believe it was Edwin Bell Edwards who said in bed with either a dead girl or a live boy.
Dead girl, a live boy, right?
It's too late. You've already made your choice.
Mm-hmm.
Elections,
that's right,
should tell us what the electorate desires,
what people actually think
at a specific point in time.
Right.
Would I allow a week for voting? Yeah, sure. You know what else I would have? I would have a national holiday on election day.
I think that makes sense. That to me makes the most sense. It should be a day off for everybody. You're closing down the schools anyway, so make it a national holiday. I think that makes sense.
Exactly.
And then everybody has the freedom to go and vote.
And we only do it every 2 years anyway. So,
sure, there
are local elections or whatever. But for federal elections, just have a national holiday for each federal election day. And that way you don't have to, you at least lose the excuse of, I didn't vote because I had to go to work. Now, Australia has this weird system where if you don't
have to vote.
Yeah, you're required to vote. You can be fined. Nope, don't like that either. I
don't either. Matter of fact, I kind of honestly would prefer that fewer people vote. I think most people are complete morons and have no idea what the hell they're voting for. I think you should have to pass some sort of test in order to, you should be at least able to identify who the candidates are, what their positions are before you can actually enter a vote.
Yeah, well, that's never going to fly because the Supreme Court has
Never, ever,
the
ever.
Supreme Court has
because
made that super clear well, certainly the discriminatory intent behind that in the 1920s and 30s and 40s was,
even further back than that,
was
yeah.
obvious. So the Supreme Court just absolutely banned that. No literacy tests, nothing like that. Everybody gets a vote. I often, Chris occasionally comes to me and talks to me about what she's seen somebody say on the on YouTube or whatever, and I always have the same reply for it, which she probably hates at this point, which is, and their vote counts every bit as much as yours.
It is disappointing. But yeah, no, I mean, look, if I had my preference, if I was a dictator, I would say, no, you don't get to vote unless you actually know something about what you're voting for. But there's really no way to do that without inviting a lot of discrimination on the basis of race and whatever else. So that's never going to happen. I'm just telling you, that's my druther.
Well, I think we've talked about this before. I don't know how deeply we got into it. My idea is to just do away with elections completely. My idea is to basically draft people at random to serve in the House and the Senate.
Yeah, the Bill Buckley effect, right?
Yeah. And basically it does come off of something that Bill Buckley said. I would rather be governed by the first 500 names in the Cambridge phone book than by the faculty of Harvard. Just say, look, here's the deal. You're going to go to Congress. This is now your turn. You've been drafted. We got an apartment for you in Washington, D.C., and you're going to go live in an apartment, and there's a cafeteria in the basement of the Congress where you can eat 3 times a day, and you are going to be our congressman for the next 2 years. And
I actually love that idea that it's a service, not, equivalent to serving your country in the military. You are now going to be part of the plebeian society.
And by the way, it's not slavery. We're going to pay you. You're going to get your 170.
We're going to pay you well.
We're going to get your 170 grand a year if you're a congressman.
Right.
If you're a senator, what is it? 250 or something like that. 230.
Something like that.
So, whatever you get drafted for, hey, you get the money for it. We're going to give you a free house, going to give you free food. You're going to get health care for those 2 years.
You're going to get great health care.
Yeah. You're
better than anybody else has.
We'll whoop you off to Walter Reed drop of a hat when you get a sniffle. But you will serve in Congress for 2 years and you will vote on stuff. And, just... it's just your turn. That's your service to the country with which we will pay you quite exorbitantly.
Frankly, it makes more sense than the way we do it now when it's all based on graft, right? I mean, I get elected because I promise you stuff that I may or may not deliver, but if I can, I'm going to give you free stuff. What kind of basis is that?
I mean, look at the Congress we have now.
Yeah.
You've got, what's her name? That old lady that dyes her hair purple and wears the big green glasses.
Katie Porter?
No. Katie Porter is much younger than this person. So we have that. We've got. I could point to, whoever on the right, I guess Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, we just have
Matt Gaetz.
We just have a bunch of buffoons in Congress. I can't imagine that just picking people at random who are old enough. I can't imagine they would do a worse job.
It would be like a jury pool, right?
And here's the thing.
I mean, the thing is, with jury pools, we're deciding people's life fates. With this. So why not do the same kind of thing?
Yeah, and that way, also to go back to Dianne Feinstein, who died at 90 years of age this week, who has been in political
And she's
office.
been for literally like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, but she's been in political office since the 1960s. First on the city council, then as mayor of San Francisco, and then
One of the richest people in Congress.
yeah. Let's just eliminate that. There are so many people who've been there for
I agree.
30, 35, 40 years. Hell, Joe Biden has been in Washington for that long almost. He's
50,
been there
he's
for
been over 50.
50. So that would just eliminate all of that. Now, would we be able to go and angrily vote for or against somebody every 2 or 4 years? No, you wouldn't. And
I'm really interested to see what the comments say about this because, I mean, it's radical, but I don't think it's that radical. I mean, you and I have talked about this many times before. I don't know if it was always on the podcast.
I don't think we've talked about it on the podcast. I know we've talked about it privately.
But, I mean, there's a lot of sense there. And it goes back much closer to what the founders really thought of how the government would work. I mean, remember, at the time, you showed up in Washington once a year for like 3 months.
And then you went home.
And then you went home because you had a business to take care of.
Or a farm.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it wasn't imperative that you be there all the time. And damn, that worked pretty well.
Yeah, for a long time.
Federal government was not all up in your business.
It worked just fine. But once and look, you probably wouldn't even have to do that if you would just repeal the 17th Amendment.
Well, yeah.
If you would just end direct election of U.S. senators, I suspect that...
Certainly one of the dumbest ideas that we've ever had.
Yeah, I suspect that much of the problem with our government would go away. But having said that, the founders, as much as we revere them, and the framers of our Constitution, were in some ways fools. Because at no point did anyone consider seriously, even though they talked about it at some length in the Federalist Papers, no one considered seriously just the sheer level of partisan hackery that would go on in Washington, D.C. Indeed, when they were framing the Constitution, nobody was even thinking about party because they set up a government that ensured by the structure of our elections that we could never have more than 2 political parties in this country.
It's true. George Washington, in his farewell address, addressed that and opposed factionalism. That's as close as I got.
Yeah, for all the good that did. I mean, the most you can say
Martin Van
is...
Martin Van Buren was probably the progenitor of the real factional politics after Andrew Jackson lost in the House, and then he put his machine to work. And then we saw machine politics.
Yeah, the closest we've ever come to having a non-factional government was during the 19th century for about 20 years, what we now call the era of good feelings, when the Democratic Party, who were then called the Democratic Republicans, confusingly, the Democratic Party was
that was Jefferson's thing.
Essentially the only political party.
Right.
So the Federalists...
Well, that was because nobody thought about parties at that point, except Jefferson.
Yeah, and
Jefferson was a little bit of a tyrant in his own right. Well, I mean, he created the Barbary Wars, and not that I fault him for it, but I mean, the Barbary Wars were extra constitutional wars. I
do see one criticism of my policy, and it is in fact from Chris, who is apparently listening and commenting. She says, "Wait, what? they need to be millionaires by the end of their
Wait,
term.
you're Chris to my Chris?
My Chris. They need to be millionaires by the end of their term, like the Congress we have now. You know what? Even though I'm drafting you to go into Congress, I'm not going to change any of the ethical rules. So if you can go to Congress for 2 years and make good for yourself, if you're smart enough to do that, I'm not even going to bind you in any way that our regular
if you're
Congressmen
there for
are.
that limited amount of time.
Yeah, I don't really see why I should strengthen the ethics rules against you. I mean, if we are going to have elections, I think we do need much more stringent ethics rules. First of all, I don't think if you run for Congress, I think you have to be legally required to invest only in United States treasuries. No stocks, no municipals, no nothing. You can invest in United States treasuries.
Dale, that's a good idea. I like that because it's the one thing you actually have an interest in that's connected to your job. That's a good agency solution, because the only way that those investments improve is if you do a good job with the economy.
Right. So you let's say you have a bond.
So you're incentivized to actually do fiscally prudent actions.
Exactly, because let's say you spend $10,000. That's the face value. You probably wouldn't be able to buy a bond for its exact face value, but let's say you buy a bond for a face value of $10,000. The best that you can hope is to get your 7% or 6% or whatever the interest rate was on the auction. It's coupon payments, and then get your $10,000 back at the end of 30 years.
Right.
Unless it
goes up in value and you could sell it early.
And how does it go up in value? You have to have a economic policy that drives interest rates and the cost of money down, because as the yield on the bond has to fall, then the price increases. So now you don't get your 10,000 back. Let's say and I'm not going to do this math in my head, so this is purely notional. Let's say you lower interest rates from
is worth more.
Yeah. So now you're
going to make more money.
Yeah. You not only get your 10,000 back, but when you sell your bond, you make like 10,500 or 11,000 or whatever, because you've lowered interest rates and you've kept interest rates reliably low. That, I think, is the only thing. And besides, you can't game that system, right?
Maybe we should just pay. Actually, you know what? Maybe we should just pay all senators that way in treasury bonds.
Just pay the entire Congress in treasury bonds?
You get treasury bonds. It's
that I'd have to think of.
You're on your own petard there.
Because they
have to sell them.
You'd have to sell them. You'd have to sell every month to pay your mortgage or what have you. That would be kind of inconvenient. But just saying that you can only invest in U.S. Treasuries, no stocks, nothing else, no munis, only U.S. Treasuries. That certainly limits, because U.S. Treasuries is a game that Congress can't mess with too much. And if they do mess with it in their own interest, that's good for all of us, because it's in all of our interest for interest rates to be low. And so, one of the things that Madison said in the Federalist Papers, and he was speaking in this case of pure democracy in the Athenian sense, not sort of representative democracy that they had built into the Constitution. But it was basically that history has shown that every democracy has always just evolved into tyranny, and it has always turned violent, and it has always turned into some sort of totalitarian regime. People will, for whatever reason, eventually vote themselves into slavery if they feel it is in their interests. And if they feel that it makes them safer, and they feel that it takes responsibility away from them, That is one of the downsides of democracy. Yeah, sure, it's out of all of the imperfect systems that humans have ever devised, it seems to be the one that increases the most well-being for the most people across time, and yet democracies tend to end badly because, as I believe it was the French guy, de Tocqueville, who said, you know, it works until it works until you learn that you can vote yourself the proceeds of public largesse, and then the whole system collapses. And I think we have largely hit the time whenever we've decided that it's time to vote ourselves all of the benefits of the public largesse.
Well, we definitely hit that time long ago. It's just gotten worse. And especially as our debt goes up. And look, this has happened. This is not a Democratic or Republican thing. It's a political class thing. They keep voting themselves more money. And even though they know it will drive up inflation, they don't care because they get the money and they can just spend it on whatever they want. And that's what they do. So they vote themselves, a big slosh of money, spend it on their favorite projects. We get the bill in the terms of we now have less purchasing power. The value of our money goes down, the value of our wages goes down, and they get to spend it on whatever they want.
But we don't see the bill for years.
That's right.
And we see the benefits up front, or the purported benefits
the
up front.
purported benefits, exactly.
And I think at $31 trillion of debt now, those bills are going to start coming due. But that...
I mean, when we're paying literally like $1 billion or almost $2 billion on debt service alone.
Yeah, and that is coming very, very soon. And I just don't know how sustainable that is. But what I do know is that that is a topic for another time. So I think for today, we're going to have to say goodbye and call it off. And we'll talk about the sword of Damocles that's hanging over our head in terms of debt at another time. So, Michael, have a great week.
All right, you too, buddy.
All right, you have been listening to, or watching, as the case may be, the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 1st of October, 2023. As always, we thank you for watching the podcast. We hope you'll be back again for the next one. Then, have a great week. We'll talk to you next week. So long.